Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome the Seal Beach Sea Cadets. Gentlemen. These youngsters are 15 and 17 years old. Thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the presentation of the colors.
Freeze! Oh, and salute!
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. I'm Sandy Quinn. I'm president of the Richard Nixon Foundation, and it's my delight, my honor, my pleasure to welcome you here today. I want to thank each and every one of you who last night paused and prayed for sunshine, because it worked, didn't it? And we're deeply grateful for that. We have a good program for you, and I'm going to move right into it. Any minute we'll have a flyover from a Harrier group of jets, which I think will be very dramatic. They will approach from the north and fly over you, and they're not going to land, so don't worry. We're not being attacked. It's a dramatic salute to our president. It's a Harrier squadron from Yuma, Arizona, the Marines. We're going to retire the color guard, and they have been retired, so we will move into the introduction of our chaplain, and please welcome for the invocation Robert Herschensohn.
Let us pray. Dear Commander-in-Chief of the universe, on this day and at this hour, we gather, as well we should, to honor the 100th birthday of our beloved nation's 37th president, Richard M. Nixon. Coming from the humblest of beginnings, this man found greatness the hard way, the right way, and the quintessentially American way. He earned it. His election to student body president at nearby Whittier College was but a harbinger of things to come. As our president, only this proven patriot and global visionary could be trusted to extend the hand of friendship to the People's Republic of China. And in so doing, he changed the world and forever changed the course of history. Inheriting America's long war in Vietnam, a war not of his making, with a steely, principled determination, he would settle for nothing less than a just and honorable peace. Domestically, his bold initiatives created opportunities for the least of these, your children, the poor, the downtrodden, and the disenfranchised. In a vocation where many take such vows lightly, he was a devoted husband to the singular love of his life, Pat, and father to their beloved daughters, Tricia and Julie, whose own lives have brought honor to their parents' legacy. And in his post-presidential years, this man never cashed in on the office. Rather, he continued to grapple with the big issues and produce the big ideas. Quietly and without fanfare, he became a trusted advisor to presidents who would follow across party lines. Finally, in the words of the great poet Rudyard Kipling, President Nixon could meet with both triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. For sharing this incredibly gifted and giving leader, a leader whose stature rises with each passing year, we offer our heartfelt thanks to you, O God, the author and finisher of every good gift. Amen.
I thought that was very dramatic. Thank you, Marines, for doing that. And I want to thank Chaplain Herschensohn, who has spoken here before on these occasions. He's from Navy Southwest, Region Southwest, and thank you, sir. Those are great words as always. I'd like to introduce some of our special guests, if I may, and it begins, of course, with Tricia Nixon Cox and her husband Ed. Let's their son Christopher and his relatively new wife Andrea. Please stand. Andrea's parents, John and Margot Katsimatidis, and their son, John Jr. John, would you stand? Thank you for coming from New York to join us today. I'd also like to acknowledge some special guests. I don't know if Congressman Royce has arrived yet. There he is, Congressman Ed Royce from the 40th District. 10-term congressman, a great friend of ours and the Nixon family, and the new chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you, sir, for coming. Our treasurer, I always have to be nice to, John Barr. Longtime board member and friend of the Nixons, Gavin Herbert. Gavin. The man who helped Richard Nixon decide to run for office and later sat with him on the football bench at Whittier College, where Richard Nixon played football. Hubert Perry, chairman or member emeritus of our board of directors. President Nixon's military aide, Colonel Jack Brennan, Marine. The Los Angeles Consul General and Ambassador, our good friend, Ambassador Xiao Fang. Where is he? And representing the National Archives, our friend here at the Presidential Library, Paul Wormser. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the reason we gather is to pay tribute to President Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States. We do this every year on his birthday. This is of particular significance, and that's why we moved it from their lovely memorials over here to the amphitheater, so all of you could be with us for this. It's a tradition at such events that the President of the United States sends a wreath from the White House, and that wreath is laid as symbolic tribute and honor and recognition to the deceased president. This is his 100th. This is the centennial year. And to lay this wreath, I'm asking Tricia Nixon Cox, Congressman Royce, son Christopher Cox, and Admiral Dixon Smith. Would you please stand and take position? And please welcome Congressman Royce to the microphone.
Thank you very much, Sandy. As Sandy mentioned, I am chairing now the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I thought I'd just share with you some observations. I had been involved in the University at Cal State Fullerton and first met Richard Nixon there when I chaired the college Republicans. But in 1993, after I was sworn into office, we had quite an honor. President Nixon came to address the House and the Senate, and I remember he noticed me there as representing, at the time, Whittier and part of Yorba Linda, and he said, Ed Royce, you represent my old district. That's a mighty fine district. Even if the other side cheats, you'll win that district. But I remember him fondly telling me a little bit about his experiences, his fondness for Yorba Linda, how his wife Pat had taught in Whittier. And what was a great honor to me was that he later said, you know, I'm going over to the Senate, and I probably have my last conversation there with the, Pat Moynihan's going to introduce me, and he's going to ask me to talk on foreign policy. Would you like to come along for that luncheon? And I indicated I certainly would appreciate that. And in his wide-ranging speech, certainly without notes, former President Nixon identified for those members of the Senate all of the great challenges that the United States would face in the decades ahead. And as he discussed his trip to China, the challenges that lie ahead, the ways in which we needed to engage China but some of his concerns. I will say for my part, I subsequently introduced legislation to broadcast into China with Radio Free Asia the same way we had with Radio Free Europe, in order to impart those lessons that he talked about that day. The necessity of having the next generation of young Chinese understand political tolerance and political pluralism, democracy, markets. But the problems he identified there were the problems we're still grappling with. And I thought I would share with you the final speech he made to the House of Representatives that day, because I have a few notes. And let me share his conclusion and his introduction. Many have said, why talk about foreign policy at all? Nobody cares. Let me tell you why foreign policy is important. It's important because foreign policy and domestic policy are like Siamese twins. One cannot survive without the other. It has an enormous impact as far as our economy is concerned. I can sum up best what America's role in the world should be. Today, the world is not going to be saved by any single nation, but America can save herself by her exertions, and can, by our example, save the cause of peace and save the cause of freedom in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's great for us to have such a good friend as our own congressman, and this was a new district for him, and we welcome you here and look forward to working closely with you. It's my pleasure to introduce General Melvin Spiese, who is a Marine and is the Deputy Commanding General of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force at Camp Pendleton. General.
Sandy, thank you for the invitation to participate in this commemoration of the centennial of the 37th President of the United States, Richard M. Nixon. I've been asked to speak on Mr. Nixon's military service and impact on the armed forces. Although himself able to avoid military service by virtue of religion and job, like millions of other young Americans, Mr. Nixon chose to serve his country in World War II. He joined the Navy at age 29, being commissioned a lieutenant junior grade in June of 1942. He served at the Naval Reserve Aviation Base in Ottumwa, Iowa, following his initial training. Seeking a greater role in the war effort, he was reassigned to the South Pacific in May of 1943 as the officer in charge of the South Pacific Combat Air Transport Command on Guadalcanal. He returned to the United States in March of 1945, serving in various assignments within the Bureau of Aeronautics until his release from active duty in March the following year. He is also the president most identified with the war in Vietnam, and we have heard the Vietnam referred to from time to time as Mr. Nixon's war. Of course, what is overlooked in those references is Mr. Nixon inherited a very well-established war from his 3 predecessors. Mr. Nixon was inaugurated in January of 1969. The war in Vietnam was at its height and troop levels at their peak. Taken in isolation and in retrospect, it may be easy to view the Vietnam War through a soda straw and focus only on Vietnam. But our world does not typically allow us to take very complex problems in isolation, as we all know today in January of 2013. In January of 1969, it was not only simply the height of the hot war in Vietnam, inherited by Mr. Nixon, but it was also the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. Mr. Nixon arrived to an ongoing nuclear arms race, and in the aftermath of the crushing of the Czech Spring in Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union, the USS Pueblo had been seized by the North Koreans. With the communist governments of the Soviet Union and People's Republic of China supporting the communist North Vietnamese, managing a withdrawal from South Vietnam without abandoning an ally, and doing so without great loss of leverage with our adversaries was an incredibly complex problem. Well before his run for the White House in 1968, Mr. Nixon gave us some insight into the complexities of the Vietnam War in a very prescient article entitled Asia After Vietnam, published in Foreign Affairs in October of 1967. He would later live those complexities in the White House. Under his presidency, he managed the transfer of responsibility of the war to the South Vietnamese, with ongoing U.S. support, and the drawdown of forces and eventual end of ground combat operations, while negotiating across the board with our adversaries in multiple areas to reduce worldwide tensions. His efforts at a responsible drawdown took into account the wide-ranging war and insurgency in Vietnam and various insurgencies throughout the neighboring states, while seeking to secure the greater Southeast Asia region and preserve our ultimate leverage for the hundreds of prisoners of war in North Vietnam, and position ourselves for dealing with the greater long-term challenges presented by the Soviets and the Chinese. It is worth noting the significant foreign policy milestones that were achieved by President Nixon as the end of our involvement in offensive ground combat operations in Vietnam was announced in January of 1973. Nearly 600 prisoners of war were repatriated in Operation Homecoming. The President's May 1972 Moscow summit with Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev produced a treaty to limit strategic nuclear weapons in the United States and the Soviet Union. And Mr. Nixon opened up the People's Republic of China to the United States, which greatly altered the balance of the Cold War and set the world on the path we now see today with China and the Chinese people. Internal to the armed forces, and easily forgotten, is that milestone policy change that former Commandant of the Marine Corps and Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, General James Jones, called the single most significant change in his career, the establishment of the President's Commission on the All-Volunteer Force and the ultimate elimination of the draft. I can speak personally and professionally to the profound impact of that change during my career. As you look across the armed forces today, and as we review the performance of all of our services during this decade of war, it is reasonable, and for me easy, to conclude that our current all-volunteer force is not simply a success, but the best force we have ever fielded. Controversy notwithstanding, and maybe even distracting, President Nixon was a model of the American citizen soldier, which has been the cornerstone of our national security and our freedom. And he was a president whose impact on the world's strategic landscape and our own armed forces is historical in context. It is appropriate for us to gather and commemorate the centennial of the birth of our 34th president and to recall and recognize his leadership and contributions to the security of our United States and the world. Thank you.
Thank you, General. You always honor us with by being here, and particularly today with those very, very true and insightful, inspiring words about the 37th president. Thank you. I'm going to retire the Sea Cadets because they have homework to do. So, gentlemen, you're excused.
And board. Hey.
Thank you. Now, let us enjoy God Bless America by Robbie Brett. Robbie?
the storm clouds gather far across the sea. Let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair as we raise our voices in this solemn prayer. We all know the next part. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with home. God bless America, my home sweet home. Let's sing it again. God bless America. God bless America, land that I love. That's beautiful. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. My home. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Robbie, do it again, would you? He is so good, and he is sang here at so many important events, and we love to have Robbie here. And we're taking him to Washington tomorrow so that he can sing that same inspiring, wonderful God Bless America at the President's Centennial Birthday Gala at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday night. Thank you, Robbie. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that President Nixon had a more loyal advisor and friend than Bruce Herschensohn. Bruce has been a wonderful friend of the Nixon family, of the foundation, of the library, since we opened here. And before that, he was special assistant to President Nixon in the White House. He's a senior fellow at Pepperdine University. You know him from his inspiring and insightful commentary on television and in his writings and in his several books. Please welcome Bruce Herschensohn.
Thank you. Thanks so very much. And Robbie, I know that you wonder why people don't all sing along with you when you request it. I'm one of them who doesn't, but I'll tell you why. It would be like William Shakespeare saying, "Read along with me as I give you my interpretation of Hamlet." No one wants to hear themselves when they can hear Robbie. I believe that it's simply true. no president, no world leader, perhaps no person other than President Nixon had the tremendous genius of looking at the world in a very unique way with a tremendous vision that's unexcelled. It isn't that he looks at it as a globe with some 200 countries. Anyone can do that. He looked at it as a globe with 200 countries and 200 leaders. And he studied every one of those leaders. And he knew most of them. And he was able to talk at great length about a particular leader, about his eccentricities, about his friends, about his foes, about his ambitions. And each day he would take time to study, unless the events worked out that he just couldn't, but study the day's events in terms of the way that those things he knew to be true on a Saturday had now changed on a Sunday. He kept up with it, and I'm talking about before the presidency, during the presidency, after the presidency. That was a passion and a talent that I have never seen equaled. Certainly everyone in D.C. who knew his habits on studying world affairs and knowing them so well had tremendous respect for that. Respect for it even if they were from the opposition party. At the beginning of 1961, President Kennedy, who just months earlier had won the election for presidency, had a jolting episode happen at the Bay of Pigs, Cuba. And he phoned former Vice President Nixon and asked him to come to D.C. to discuss world affairs. And former Vice President Nixon, of course, did that. And they were in the Oval Office, and the former Vice President was seated on one of those cushioned chairs in the Oval Office. And President Nixon, for the most part, apparently was standing and pacing. And they discussed the conflicts of the time: Cuba, West Berlin, India and Pakistan, the Congo, Indonesia and the United Nations were having a rift between them. And of course, Southeast Asia, particularly Laos and South Vietnam. And President Nixon, after a good length of time of discussing the conflicts, stopped his pacing. And he said to the former vice president, he said, "This is the stuff of presidents, isn't it?" And Nixon agreed, nodded. And then President Kennedy said, "I mean, who cares if the minimum wage is $1.15 or $1.25? He didn't really mean that he didn't care. It meant that that wasn't the stuff of presidents. That's the stuff of Congress. And no matter how much the president may want or not want a raise in what was current at the time, a minimum wage, he could only talk about it. But the final jurisdiction would be up to the Congress. But when it came to foreign affairs, that's the stuff of presidents. That's the kind of thing that a president can do. Doesn't take a Congress. It takes a president. There can only be one commander-in-chief. You can't have 535 commanders-in-chief. After the presidency, President Clinton, another Democrat, was president. And when he was president, he received a report from former President Nixon on a trip he took to Russia. And the president, and Bill Clinton, said that he had never, and he said this publicly, he had never received a better report on world affairs during his entire presidency than he received from President Nixon. There were so many other, let me just mention these things. If you talk to him about France, he isn't going to tell you about the Eiffel Tower. He's going to tell you about meeting with Charles de Gaulle on many occasions, on admiring Charles de Gaulle because really of his biography, which was so immense, and he would describe him as a big man, every dimension big, and what he did during World War II, in Great Britain, when Paris was taken over by the Nazis, coming back to France, and then becoming president of France, and having on his mind what was called a grand design of someday Europe being led by France. If you talked about Moscow, it wouldn't be about Red Square or the Lenin Mausoleum. It would be about his debate with Chairman Nikita Khrushchev when he was vice president for President Eisenhower. And he would talk about this man and tell you that he was a confrontationalist. He loved debating, that he was sort of a not extremely sophisticated in world events, not very knowledgeable about those things that you would expect a world leader to be knowledgeable about it. And how he compared with Leonid Brezhnev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union when President Nixon was president himself. And he would say this man was entirely different than Khrushchev. Leonid Brezhnev was much more sophisticated. He was much more knowledgeable about the world, much more knowledgeable about the United States. And although he was very strong, he would use confrontation as a last device, not something that he would use first, not in contrast to Khrushchev. And then he would add a detail, which President Nixon just absorbed details. He said, and you know, Khrushchev never wore cufflinks. Brezhnev always wore them. Wow, I mean, that's seemingly unimportant. But it isn't unimportant when it's put together with all of the stuff that the president knew and had in his head, because it all gave a very large picture and an accurate picture. And these details, he would come up with, I'm not going to mention, anyone who talked with him could know any number of these details. But it was just, it was a marvelous thing to realize. And then he would not just study, but when he studied, he would go over all the things he already knew so that his brain could just get to them like that if he was ever asked. I want to mention someone else because of, particularly of what the generals stated. There's someone named Bud Day, a Colonel Bud Day, who was captured and was in the Hanoi Hilton, as it was called, as the American prisoners termed it. And he was badly tortured, very badly treated, an extremely marvelous guy. And he received the Medal of Honor from President Ford. And he made a statement later on. He said, in talking about it, he said, I was very humbled and so appreciative to President Ford. He said, but I very much wanted to see President Nixon and receive the medal from him. And so he went on an airliner, took a plane, came to San Clemente, visited with President Nixon. He said, the reason I did this is because of President Nixon's courage and conviction that I know I would never have gotten out of the Hanoi Hilton if it wasn't for that man. And President Nixon, not ceremonially, but just between the two of them, took the Medal of Honor, gave it back to Bud Day. And I want to mention something else that, because the general mentioned it, and certainly Congressman Royce did regarding the president and foreign affairs. There are great myths about Vietnam. I hear them repeated continually. I hear them 4 nights ago. I was watching C-SPAN and I heard someone who was teaching in George Mason University talk about Vietnam. The person was probably in their 30s. She was in her 30s. Nothing, she said, Nothing was accurate. And I saw the students writing it all down. I thought, my God, this has got to stop someday. The myths that we are passing, when I say we, I may be saying that in a collective sense, are passing on to the next generation are just beyond belief to me. A lot of it is from those people who don't want the new generation to know what happened. I mean, I just tell you, there's so many of them. When I talked about Bud Day, he was thankful for the December bombing of Hanoi and Haiphong. President Nixon had ordered the bombing of Hanoi and Haiphong. And because of that bombing, the North Vietnamese came to the peace table. They had messed around about not coming from President Johnson's time. The yes, then no, yes, then no. They came because they felt they now lost the war. And they've said that in their memoirs. They've said that in their public addresses. But I want you to tell you that still, in any history book, it's called the Christmas bombing. I might be calling it the Christmas bombing today if I didn't work for President Nixon. He wanted to know from a number of people on his staff, should we bomb on Christmas? He didn't want to. My response was, absolutely. First off, it's an atheist government. It certainly isn't Christian. They have a habit of bombing on holidays. Even the Tet Offensive was done on Tet, biggest day of that part of the world, in Southeast Asia. And I said, that if we don't, they'll probably use it to come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and gave all kinds of reasoning. Well, he decided he still wanted to not bomb on Christmas Day. There was something he just didn't like about it. And so he called for a 36-hour bombing halt. Look under C in any book on Vietnam, and you'll probably find the Christmas bombing, with no explanation of why they call it the Christmas bombing. It would be like saying Pearl Harbor was the Christmas bombing by Japan. No, it wasn't on Christmas. But it makes it seem worse. It makes it seem awful. It was marvelous in that it caused the North Vietnamese to feel they had now lost the war. And we weren't naive about thinking that they're not going to try violations of this accord. Of course, they did try violations. And they tried violations, but the president had already put in the Paris Peace Accords that if they do violate it, we would resupply South Vietnam with anything they lost. A bullet for a bullet, a helicopter for a helicopter, all of that. Anything. But after President Nixon left office, the Congress, which darn near took over everything, would not appropriate the money to resupply South Vietnam when the violations came from North Vietnam. It was the 94th Congress, and they wouldn't do it. President Ford, on April the 10th of 1975, made a speech to the country. It was to a joint session of the Congress, but it was on television that night, pleading that unless we keep our word that we signed for in the Paris Peace Accords, that in short time Cambodia is going to surrender, and very likely South Vietnam would too. That was April the 10th. April the 17th, Cambodia fell. April the 30th, South Vietnam fell. It was the criminality, in my view, of the 94th Congress that caused the 2.25 years after the North Vietnamese lost the war, they realized they could now win it because we were violating our own treaty. Senator Fulbright, the night of the fall of South Vietnam, said, "I am no more distressed than I would be if Arkansas lost a football game to Texas." Well, now it's not funny. That was a feeling of some, but it caused a genocide in Cambodia of over 2 million. It caused re-education camps in Vietnam throughout the entire country of South Vietnam. And it caused boat people, about 1 million of them, 1/2 of them, still lying under the South China Sea. We should know that. We should know what was caused by those people who wanted peace, peace now, and applauded the idea that perhaps there would be peace along with all of us, but said nothing about what happened 2¼ years later and why it fell, and why on earth history books and some history professors say the opposite. I don't, not say the opposite, but don't tell this part of the story is just beyond me. Let me just tell one personal story, if I may, and then I'll leave. After the presidency was over, and President Nixon was living in the East Coast, Jerry Dunphy, who was, you may remember, as the anchorman on KABC TV, great guy, and President liked him a lot. I like him a lot. Anyway, Jerry Dunphy and I went to the East Coast, and President Nixon asked us to have lunch with him at 21. Not bad. So we did, and it was just marvelous. Everyone in the place was just so thrilled that President Nixon was there, and they're all wanting to talk to him, and he did. He was just terrific. And then after it was over, we went outside. Word had gotten out that President Nixon was there. Tremendous crowd outside. Into the street, the streets that aren't that wide, not the big avenues, the cross streets. Into the street, so there was only one lane that was left open. And police came, and they sort of put their arms around the crowd to hold them in some sort of tight union, that this one lane would be able to move. And the president was answering questions. As usual, he segued into foreign policy on some of the answers. And so I did what anyone who ever worked for the president would do when he was in a situation where there was a crowd or there were people people would stay in the Oval Office and visit with the president for a week if you'd allow it. But you didn't want the president to have to be the one to say, gee, I got to go. So you did what anyone would do and stuff. You look at your watch and you say, Mr. President, you're going to be late for that meeting. Okay. So it got to that point where I thought, gee, I think he wants to get out of here. So I said, Mr. President, you're going to be late to that meeting. Looks at me, gives a little smile, which he had a habit of doing. You could hardly see it, but there it was, a little smile. And I said, Mr. President, you're going to be late for that meeting. He said, cancel it. I thought, Jesus. Well, this was before mobile phones. I didn't even know what to do with myself. He knew I was lying. Jerry Dunphy knew I was lying. I knew I was lying. And now I had to act. I mean, I can't say, Mr. President, what are you talking about? So I walk back into 21, and I go in a phone booth, and I hide my face just in case anyone is looking, see me talking to no one. And I waited and waited an appropriate amount of time, and I came back out. And I said, I didn't say anything. I mean, I just came back out, and he looked at me and said, did you cancel that meeting? And I said, yes, Mr. President, I did. And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is this is a tremendous crowd, and we were all warned about the weather. To see here, and so many friends of President Nixon, so many personal friends. I'm positive the president's here. And I'm positive he just loves this. And I will not, under these conditions, I will not look at my watch and say, Mr. President, you're going to be late for this meeting. Because he's going to say cancel it, and I'm going to have to go through that whole thing all over again. But I will say this, and I'm taking this from the slogan of the 1972 campaign, paraphrasing it. We need Nixon now more than ever. And on this centennial of his birthday, we miss him more than ever. We miss his character, his courage, his goodness more than ever. Thanks.
Well, it's easy to see and appreciate Bruce's great love and loyalty for the 37th president. Thank you, Bruce. I know I know how much the president enjoyed having Bruce here whenever he came to the library, and they spent considerable time together, not just here, but of course in the years before. So thank you for your great loyalty and friendship with all things Nixon. Please stand, ladies and gentlemen, for the Riflemen of Camp Pendleton, the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. Thank you to all of you who participated in this program today. Thank you, the National Weather Service, for blessing us with this sunshine. Thank you to the military, to the Navy, Region Southwest, and to these great Marines. Thank you for participating with us, and we welcome you back anytime. The band is going to continue to play, and this concludes the program. And to the President, we salute you, we toast you, we thank you for all you did for America. Thank you.